Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome all councillors, officers and members of the public viewing on YouTube to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. My name is Councillor Paul Myers and I'm Chair of the panel. I'll now call out the names of other members of the panel and please ask them to confirm that they are present. So, Councillor Winston Dogood.
Present.
Councillor Mark Elliott.
Present.
Councillor Andy Furs.
Here.
Councillor Lucy Hodge.
Yeah, present.
Councillor Sean Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Hal McPhee.
Present.
Councillor Alistair Singleton.
Present.
And Councillor Karen Warrington.
Present, Chair.
Thank you, everybody. Can I remind members and officers to try and keep background noise to a minimum, to only speak one person at a time and not to speak over others? Can you please mute your microphones when you're not speaking and then unmute when I invite you to speak? If you could please indicate if you wish to speak by using the chat facility on Zoom by typing MIS, may I speak, and I will call you to speak in turn. If I do miss somebody, then by all means wave if you're getting frustrated, but I'll do my very best. If a member of the panel has to leave the meeting, then could you please draw my attention to this by using the chat facility? And if you subsequently return to the meeting, then please also draw my attention to this in the same way, because obviously if people are missing part of the debate, it will affect their ability to actually then vote and things like that. We are here for a specific purpose today, and that's to look at 2 points of the call-in relating to a council-owned property at 117 Newbridge Hill. And I'm going to now just read through the 2 sections of the wording of the call-in. The first is the decision to dispose of the asset at nearly £500,000 below market value and on a non-competitive basis is contrary to the interests of council taxpayers in Bath and North East Somerset. And secondly, the case has not been made to justify the below market value disposal, and so the asset should be listed on the open market where it will fetch greater returns for the council. Any other aspects of council company governance or any related subjects are not within the scope of today's meeting. We are here to really focus on the wording and what's been requested in this call-in. I would also note, to avoid confusion, that whilst there were 2 decisions on the council's forward plan relating to 117 Newbridge Hill, only the one made by the cabinet member, Councillor Samuel, is to be scrutinised today. The other decision taken by the leader as shareholder of a council-owned company is outside the jurisdiction of this panel. And given that there's been some confusion on this matter, I'll ask Michael Hewitt to confirm my understanding, if he would please, on this point as council solicitor now. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. I confirm that any shareholder decision is exempt from calling under the Constitution.
Thank you. So our role today as councillor representatives of the public is to scrutinise a decision on behalf of those very residents of Baines, and in an independent, non-party political way. As such, I'd encourage every one of us to listen to the facts put before us, ask questions so we're really clear about our understanding, so that we're then ready to discuss and debate, and at the end of the session come to a conclusion. Yeah. So does anybody have any questions before we actually proceed? No? Well, thank you very much, everybody. I'll just check that my chat is open and that I've not missed anybody. No, I haven't. Splendid. So I'll now move to item 2 on our agenda, which is apologies for absence and substitutions. Could the Democratic Services Manager please just confirm? I don't believe we have any.
Yeah, no, we haven't received any. Thank you.
Okay. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest to make? No? And of course, as usual, if anybody does realise something through the meeting, if you could just draw our attention to it, then that's fine. Okay. Item 4 is urgent business, and I can confirm as chair that there is no urgent business. So we'll now move on to item 5, which is where members of the public and councillors can make statements. And the format for this session will be is each speaker will have 3 minutes, and there'll be an opportunity after each speaker to ask questions. These will be questions ideally of fact, and I will encourage and hold us all back because I know we're keen, but this isn't the point where we enter the debate. This is the members of the public and councillors to make their statements. So if I could please begin by inviting Councillor Colin Blackburn to speak, and you have now 3 minutes. Are you ready?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. Off you go.
Hello, fellow councillors. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you this afternoon. As you will remember, pre-pandemic, I led 2 cross-group call-ins against 2 decisions made by Councillor Samuel. You kindly acknowledged the concerns, even after you were taken into private sessions, which I was later advised by Maria Lucas I should have been allowed to attend, and you were given confidential information to try and justify the decisions made. Thankfully, you still saw fit to allow the call-ins to stand, but Councillor Samuel stuck by his original decisions, mainly, I believe, because his hands were tied by the actions of officers who put us as a council into legally binding situations that couldn't seemingly be reversed. This call-in is different. Firstly, while I wanted another show of cross-group unity and to present a call-in with more detailed argument about why this is wrong, the call-in was rushed in by the eagerness of a group, led to score points for reasons I don't understand as an independent, but please ignore that. This is of concern to councillors across all groups who fear our residents are being shortchanged. We have a legal duty when disposing of any asset to get the best consideration. The planning permission to change the property from offices and redevelop back to housing as 6 apartments was granted 2 years, 5 months ago. What actions have been taken since then when it was decided that it was surplus to requirements to get best offers to achieve best consideration? I had a lengthy Zoom meeting with Councillor Samuel in early January to express my concerns and to find out if he still wanted to press ahead with the decision. He informed me that a valuation had been obtained based on what the purchaser wanted to do of just 450,000. He felt that was too low and had gone back to ask for context. Please bear in mind this property had been valued on our asset register at circa 800,000, and a building with planning permission in place, when those costs had already been paid by our own property service department, would normally attract a premium to a previous valuation. You don't value something based on what the purchaser wants to do with it. You value something on what the market is prepared to pay for it, with the legal considerations put in place to ensure it is still redeveloped as 6 apartments. I have even had a local developer write to me and offer 750,000 under those conditions since this matter became public. I assured Councillor Samuel that if he pushed ahead with the disposal to Aqueous, it would this time be his decision being called into question, not one he could say he was legally forced to make because of prior officer action. Imagine my horror to see not only that he decided to sell it, but he's taken over 30% less than even the valuation that he was questioning. I wish I had 10 minutes to speak to you to cover other aspects of this that the call-in has failed to question, but I do implore you to please uphold this call-in because the decision is unfair to all our residents at a time when monies are so tight. It needs to be reconsidered, and I believe better value can be obtained for Baines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I ask the panel, does anybody have any factual questions for Councillor Blackburn. Could you use the chat, please, Andy? Have you got the? Is that a request? Yeah.
Yeah. Please, yeah. During Councillor Blackburn's speech or presentation, he mentioned an offer of 750,000. Was that an offer received in writing to the council, or was it just a verbal offer to you, Councillor Blackburn?
I received it in writing to me personally, just by somebody expressing their absolute surprise that this hasn't even gone to public to get best offers, and that person said I would be willing to pay 750 for it, and that's without it going to a proper tender process. That's what the market is telling me.
And can I just ask a second point on that same issue? So, and was that offer made with full visibility of the conditions placed on the property? Like, I think one of the conditions is no HMOs and things like that.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dogood.
Well, it was that last point. So the valuation was based on this possibly being a 5-bedroomed detached house rather than apartments aimed at the market that might service the RUH.
No, it was for somebody to redevelop it based on the planning permission to have it as 6 apartments, understanding that there was a desire to have it restricted to not go to HMO and not be accessible as Airbnb type properties. This was for commercial redevelopment. And that's what I believe we have not tested the market to ensure that we're getting best consideration.
Okay. Are there any more questions? I've not got any in the chat. If not, I will now move on to, and thank you, Councillor Blackburn. I will now move on to Bob Goodman. Are you there, Bob?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. The
Do you
floor.
hear me?
Yeah, the floor is yours, and you've got 3 minutes.
Right. I find it depressing that I should be speaking to this scrutiny panel for the 3rd time within a year on commercial property irregularities. And this is unquestionably the most serious of all. This council administration know perfectly well what is going on. Aquis was formed primarily to ensure empty areas above shops in the city centre should be brought back into residential use. They are going far beyond this remit. I have had many occasions with the operation, been concerns with many operations of this company and made that abundantly clear even when I was cabinet member. How shocked am I to see that this council and the cabinet member at this meeting willing to sell property worth £800,000 for a sum of little over 300. I wonder how many of you, and indeed our residents, know that this administration has entered into an agreement to ensure that there is a future pipeline of developments to Aquis. Wow, I bet my clients would love such an agreement in the private sector. If that is not an open checkbook, it's our open checkbook, by the way, I do not know what is. Let's look at the business case the cabinet member was asked to consider. They will make a sum of £600,000 for the council, but that's made up of £308,000 purchase price, which is a figure that they have come up with. They've added £37,000 of council tax over 5 years and £7,000 new home bonus, both of which this council would have received whoever does the development. But then there's a sweetener, £35,000 interest charge the council could make. If this is what the council has come down to, that is quite appalling. This business case is misleading, to say the least. What's their excuse? Well, we do not want it to be a luxury house. How pathetic is that, when unquestionably, as a house with planning consent for 6 flats, it is worth more than a single house? Planner, do not believe what you are being told. The profession within this city are ashamed with what this council and the way they are allowing Aquis to behave. I indeed have an email from a fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Affairs and probably the most knowledgeable and respected valuer in the city, and I quote from that email. If this property was placed on the open market in its current condition, I would anticipate it would have a significantly higher value with planning permission for 6 flats than a single house. I think it is quite clear that the only reason this property is being sold at a knockdown price is to keep what is a failing development company going at our expense. The decision to sell this property to Aquis at this price is a clear breach of the trust we have given our elected representatives. The scrutiny panel should refer this decision to full council and should look for clear independent advice on this decision, and indeed the way that this company is being run. When decisions have been made so that the 2 directors can receive salaries approaching that of the Prime Minister, then that cannot be right. This is quite simply shameful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Karen Warrington, I've got to speak first with a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thanks for that, Bob. I just wanted to ask you, you made the statement in your statement that a single flats being redeveloped, 6 flats would be potentially return more than a single home, or be if it's sold with the planning application. What about student and holiday lets? Would that take in a similar sort of value as the 6 apartments?
Purposely, Karen, I haven't. I do not. I think that possibly could be worth more if that came into play. But that's not how I personally think it should go. I'm quite happy to be 6 flats. I think that's the right thing. Bear in mind, the council own it. Wouldn't it be good to have some social flats in there? But that's not around. No, I don't. I think it probably would be worth more if it was Airbnb, but that's not on the table, so I haven't mentioned that.
Okay, I've got Councillor Dogood next.
Hi, Bob. Just to be clear, are you calling into question the competence of Knight Frank in giving that restricted value of 308,000?
If they have given that as one, I think you should look at that clearly, have that independently reviewed. Yes.
Okay, Councillor Mark Elliott.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Goodman. Just to clarify, do you believe that Cabinet members should follow the advice given to them by professional advisors, such as valuers?
I think they should look at all aspects before making a decision. Did I, when I was a Cabinet, take advice? I took that into account in assessing it. We've just heard from Councillor Blackburn that the Cabinet member thought 450,000 was too cheap. Why has it gone to 308,000? Quite frankly, as I've said, is actually a joke. There is no way this property is only worth £308,000 for 6 flats.
So to be clear, you are saying that a Cabinet member should go against the professional advice that they're given?
If the Cabinet member believes that the advice is wrong, he should clearly seek other advice. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, would anybody else like to speak? No, on that basis then, I'll now move on, and I'd like to invite David Stubbs to make your statement, please.
Thank you, Chair. By way of introduction, I'm a Bath resident. I'm also a retired chartered valuation surveyor, and prior to my retirement, I was a lead consultant to Baines Property Services Department in respect of its commercial estate, and I also gave advice to Baines and other authorities on sales at undervalue, section 123, and also residential development viability. It seems to me that the rationale behind the decision is flawed. the reason given in support of a discount of 480,000 pounds is the imposition of voluntary conditions to provide 6 apartments for young professionals and first-time buyers. My experience of the residential development market leads me to conclude that any developer expecting to achieve a gross development value from the sales of the 6 flats, which are estimated to be in excess of £2 million, would be prepared to pay at or close to the unconditional value reported by Knight Frank. To me, the nonsense of this transaction is that Baines will borrow money from the Public Sector Works Loans Board to lend it to ADL, to then enable it to pay the council the purchase price of 308. So Baines is borrowing money in the hope that it will make a profit after that land price of somewhere between 290 and 500,000 pounds, which represents a return of between 15 and 23% on the gross development value of 2 million, which is not enough. For a development of this sort, you would expect to make a higher margin because it's quite risky. And therefore we're putting public money at risk, which is always a worry to me anyway. So why do this when the private sector would happily deliver 6 flats and I think would pay you that price even with those conditions? If ADL were to bring something additional to the table, and Bob mentioned affordable housing, and certainly that's something we're desperate for, then I could be a lot more supportive. My suspicion is that the real reason for doing this is because ADL are desperate for a pipeline of property and are unable to make a profit unless the purchase price is discounted. So I would really like to see the property presented to the market with those conditions, and ADL can bid. And if they win, great, we'll all be pleased. My worry is that they won't outbid the private sector because their business model with relatively high fixed costs and reliance on relatively soft deals from Baines, I think it's flawed, and I don't think they'd succeed. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very, very much. My first speaker is Mark Elliott. If you'd like to ask your question, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stubbs. Just to be clear, you're obviously questioning the valuation that Knight Frank have come up with. Do you have a reason why they would come up with the wrong valuation?
I thought you might ask me that. If I was still a registered valuer, I would say what I'm going to say now, which is that until it's possible to see the valuation and the methodology and the instructions that were given, I would not criticize another valuer. Valuation is an opinion, and Knight Frank will have had good reason for their valuation, and until I can see those reasons, it's very difficult. What I'm not prepared to do is to say Knight Frank have got it wrong, because I don't know what the basis of their valuation is. All I can really say is, in my view, and it appears that I'm not alone in this, standing in front of that property and asking yourself, is this worth 308? The answer every time is no, it's not. And I do struggle to put a value of over 400,000 on that constraint of developing it as 6 flats.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're saying that if you did see the justification for that valuation, that you're not suggesting that there's any kind of fiddling of the numbers, or?
I've no reason to suggest that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any more questions for David Stubbs? No? Otherwise, thank you very much for coming today, David.
Pleasure.
We'll now move on. If I could ask Councillor Jackson to come on video, and you have 3 minutes to make your statement. You're on mute, Eleanor. Eleanor, you're on mute. Okay, is there any way of taking Eleanor off mute? Eleanor, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Myself, so what's happened?
Right, there we are. You're now off mute and we can hear you, Eleanor.
Right, may I start again, please?
Well, yes, because we didn't know.
You wouldn't want to miss a single golden word.
I certainly would not, and I'm sure the panel feels the same. So I'll now start timing you again for 3 minutes. So
Thank you very much. I have consistently opposed the council administration selling off the family silver. But here we have a situation where the silver seems to be classed as silver gilt, and the value of the property on the one hand is distorted by assumptions about the planning process, and on the other by questionable methods of decision making. Firstly, what I have to say should not be taken to prejudice in any way my view of whatever planning application may appear. Under the current planning regime, offices may be converted to flats. But is this an office block or a children's centre, which would involve change of use permission? The word apartment is used. That usually means there will be a management fee for garden fees, cleaning of common facilities, and so on. And as any resident of private sheltered housing and so on will tell you, that can be far from affordable. Leasehold properties also have drawbacks, which may discourage purchasers and tenants. But planning is not about the actual use, beyond the question of the amenities such as sufficient light into the dwelling, sustainability, is it near a bus stop or whatever, and parking. Looking at the track record of the Planning Committee since 2019, it cannot and should not be assumed that planning consent would be given for an HMO or a hostel or holiday accommodation. Yet until I read this paper, I had assumed that encouraging tourism and accommodating students was an essential part of the policies for Bath and income generation for the council. This is not an area with HMO restrictions at present, but we have refused plans for Locksbrook Road, Newbridge Road, and so on. We might, and I stress might, consider that 6 apartments was overdevelopment of the site, or that the damage to a heritage building was unacceptable. The assumptions about planning that are made here in this valuation clearly affect it. Secondly, in my experience as a parish council and long ago in connection with Serona, 3 valuations are needed. Westfield Council is buying the waterside fields in Westfield. We have 3 quotations for every step of the way. I cannot believe that a different rule appears here. This is hardly an emergency supply of PPE. Has the property been surveyed, and by whom? Is there asbestos? So today I would request you to request the cabinet member to go back to the drawing board and get at least 2 more valuations. And while he's at it, produce the evidence of the need for this accommodation. In Westfield, we have a parish plan, but I'm not aware of anything covering this area here, except what Will Sandry did in his graduate retention survey for the scrutiny panel in 2014. But times change. So while you're at it, please produce evidence of need, Councillor Samuel. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Councillor Jackson. Would anybody like to ask any questions of Councillor Jackson? No, I have no questions in chat. So it just remains to thank you, Councillor Jackson, for your statement. And if I might now call Councillor Paul May to make his statement, please. And you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, splendid.
Thank you. Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak. I fully accept the administration has been elected to make decisions, but as a backbench member, I seek clarity on 2 main issues not having seen any exempt information. The first is related to the need. I've not seen any housing needs analysis for the property. Currently, Rightmove showed 208 1- and 2-bed flats within the city for sale at between 145,000 and 350,000, with an average figure of about 250,000, and a further 76 in Keynsham, some of which are owned by the council. A voluntary condition about its use does not reserve the apartments for the RUH. The city's enormous volume of HMOs, which are not all tied to the university, so rental opportunities also exist. My second point is about the value. If the 6 apartments, and I apologise, I'm not a valuer, so I've tried to work this out from the figures provided. If the 6 apartments are of an average value of about 250,000, this would return 1.5 million. If the site open market value 800 odd thousand is being discounted to 300,000, the 482,000 has to be added to the 1.5 million, which makes the total value of about £2 million. The maximum gross return, gross, not net, is shown as 600 to 800,000, which means the works are potentially going to cost between 1.2 and 1.4 million. When I asked the Section 151 officer whether the works would, in financial regulations, be competitively tendered for, I was told the works are not being directly contracted because ADL is TECAL exempt. And TECAL, just for your information, is TECKAL. Although I'm not sure this exemption applies to ACL, which is the second report which was not being scrutinised this evening. SIPFA, which is the public finance body, advises that TECAL exemptions are complex and subject to challenge. A TECAL company has to solely provide a service to the council, with only 20% of its turnover being private trading in order to ensure transparency and competitiveness. With the current Keynsham development having at least 80% of its flats for sale in the public marketplace, I asked the scrutiny committee to check whether the TECAL exemption is valid in proving value for money for council taxpayers. So my queries now are threefold. One, has the need been proven, and is it guaranteed that this could be made available for the NHS RUH people? Two, the value for public money, has that been proven transparent and competitive in comparison with commercial developers? And the third, the consequence of using a TECAL exemption could be examined independently to ensure any public challenge can be resisted by the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very, very much. So are there any questions for Councillor May? I've not got any in the chat. No. Okay, well, thank you very much, Councillor May. That now concludes our statements from members of the public and councillors. So we'll therefore move to item 6, which is the call-in of E3229 asset disposal 117 Newbridge Hill. And if I could please invite Councillor Vic Pritchard to come forward, who's the lead call-in member on this.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The Conservative group has brought this decision before the panel today with a call-in because we firmly believe the property in question, 117 Newbridge Hill, should not be disposed of at the proposed price of nearly £500,000 below market value. And that's to sell at such a gross undervaluation is at best without any justification whatsoever, and at worst, financially irresponsible in the extreme. I'll begin by examining the core facts and a few home truths which this administration seems to have lost sight of. Then I will move on to examine the flimsy justification for this decision before highlighting what I see as the true reason for this disposal of a council asset at a knockdown price. This asset belongs to the people. The first home truth I remind the panel of is that the council has no money of its own. An independent valuation of the property placed its value at £790,000. The administration, however, is proposing to sell it to the council's own property company at just £308,000, a knockdown of £482,000. Every penny of this £482,000 belongs not to the council, but to the people of Bath and North East Somerset. Local Government Act seeks best value for money. This is why I feel we also need to remind the panel that when disposing of an asset, the council is legally obliged to secure best value for taxpayers. This is usually interpreted as the open market value of an asset. I therefore call on the panel to keep this important legal and moral obligation in mind and to remember why it's there in the first place, because we are only temporary custodians of public money and public buildings. We must act with the utmost responsibility when taking decisions that affect them. So what is the administration's justification for a decision to sell the property at nearly £500,000 below market value and to avoid placing it on the open market? We are told that this is the only way to ensure that any future use of the building does not negatively impact wider society. However much I recognise the laudable aims of ensuring satisfactory future use of the building, and like the administration, we would be disappointed to see future development that would be detrimental to society. But where will this end? Whatever the future use of the building may be, such a concern surely cannot take precedence over an immediate financial loss to the council of nearly £500,000. It's one house versus 8 flats in an authority of multiple homes. I have to say this whole thing simply does not stack up. A dangerous precedent is developing. I fear there is a dangerous precedent and accusations of selling off, or perhaps better described as giving away, the family silver that having been aimed at this administration before. For example, the ransom strip recently sold to Bath Cricket Club for a measly £150,000 could have fetched up to £4 million on the open market. It's beginning to look as if this administration is intent on wiping out the council's asset portfolio in a single electoral term. What's next? Roman baths, the Guildhall? This decision would set a dangerous and worrying precedent and would undermine public trust in the authority from which this administration and all future administrations would suffer. We are living in a time of great economic and financial uncertainty. Can the council really risk foregoing £500,000 of hard cash now in the hope that at a future date it can recoup it? What are they saying is rather than getting the full value for the property now and spending the money on schemes to help save the homeless, they'd rather gamble the council's money. Who is to say that by the time the property is developed, the property market will be as strong? And what if the council's property company goes bust? If the decision goes ahead and at a later date the council's property company fails, has the administration given any thought as to what will happen to the building and the council's subsequent financial position? Is not a bird in the hand worth 2 in the bush? Get the cash now into the council's hard-pressed coffers. An awful lot of risk to achieve just 8 flats. No, it's still not stacking up, is it? So why are they so desperate to be able to dispose of this asset? Is the elephant in the room that as a result of this administration's mismanagement of its own property company, that is so desperately short of work on its books that the only way it can survive is to get the hands on 117 Newbridge Hill? What other explanation can there be for the reluctance on the part of the administration to press ahead with this decision? They must have known how appalling it would look, and my word, it does just that. They must surely be desperate. I have no doubt that we are about to hear an eloquent financial justification for their course of action, but just remember, as the voice of reason, we are giving you today the opportunity to reconsider your decision before it's too late. As a minimum, ask the cabinet member to review his thinking and consider the risks and all the costs in achieving just 8 flats. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Councillor Pritchard, please? No? No questions? Okay. On that basis then, I will invite the Cabinet Member for Resources, Councillor Richard Samuel, to speak to us for 10 minutes. I should have said for Councillor Pritchard, although he did know, don't worry, that he had 10 minutes. So, Councillor Samuel, are you ready to take the floor?
I am.
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I intend to take the issues raised in this call-in notice sequentially in the order they appear. So call-in reason number 1, the decision to dispose of the asset at nearly £500,000 below market value on a non-competitive basis is contrary to the interests of council taxpayers in Baines. Now, there are 3 arms to that first part. The decision to dispose below open market value, the decision not to use a competitive process, and the assertion that both the above are contrary to the interests of taxpayers. I'm going to take each one in turn. So the first one, the decision to dispose below open market value. Now, this is important to have some background here. The property, as you've seen from the papers, was previously occupied by Children's Services and declared surplus to operational requirements on the 22nd of February 2018. Now, in a single member decision of the 15th of August 2018, Councillor Gerrish and Councillor May authorised the use of anticipated capital receipts from the disposal of 117 Newbridge Hill as a contribution to Radstock Library and Children's Centre project. Now, sadly, delays in that project meant that the planned application of those receipts did not proceed. In an unpublished report prepared for the Cabinet in November 2018, 20 sites, including 117 Newbridge Hill, were identified by the Cabinet as potential transfers to ADL. The report states that consideration was to be given to the conversion of the building into 6 flats. Now, as there was no further usable purpose for this property, the council at the time had these options: retention for another purpose, discounted by the Cabinet during 2018, open market disposal to create a receipt, considered and agreed by the Cabinet during August 2018, but subsequently discounted, and then disposal to ADL at a reduced value to reflect conditions imposed by the council and create a dividend after development. The policy decision to convert the building into 6 units was made by the previous Cabinet member. Now, the summary of this part is that the decision to dispose of 117 Newbridge Hill to ADL was made by a Cabinet member in 2018 as a component of the possible development pipeline to ADL. It must be assumed, in the absence of any information to the contrary, that the whole Cabinet agreed that approach. Now, on assuming office and during discussions on the ADL pipeline, 117 Newbridge Hill was identified as brought forward for for development, and ADL were asked to prepare a business case as required by the council. I agreed that conditions proposed by officers should be applied to the disposal as follows: 6 quality apartments targeted at professional workers and first-time buyers, a scheme that contributed to meeting the adopted climate and nature emergency action plan, including sustainable energy and efficiency improvements within the dwelling, and the encouragement of green transport through electric charging points and bike stores. No holiday lets or HMOs were to be agreed. So having reached this position, you now have to think about the law that applies in these circumstances. Now, others have referred to some of this, and I won't go through all of the detail of it, but Section 123 of the Local Government Act applies. And in normal circumstances, the council has to achieve best consideration for its disposal of its assets. Now, in determining that best consideration, an independent market valuation using a RICS certified valuer with experience in the area must be used. And that is exactly what the council did. That's actually set out in the law and the guidance that goes with Section 123. And I won't go through all the details of the circumstances in which the consents operate. We can deal with those in questions. But the conclusion of this is that if the council is seeking to impose voluntary conditions on any disposal that leads to a disposal at less than best consideration, then it must use an independent valuer. Now, in reaching decisions on matters with technical, legal, and financial components, it is not open to the decision maker, me in this case, to discard or seek to amend the advice received, especially where this is mandated by law. And some of your speakers today have misled themselves seriously for decision makers to depart from the legal advice and technical advice given to them by officers, drawing on external independent advice, I believe would be ultra vires. So it's actually quite serious. One does not do that. Now I want to deal with the question about not using a competitive process. The current wholly owned council-owned company arrangements were approved by the Conservative Cabinet on the 2nd of December 2015. There were subsequent officer and member decisions to give effect to those arrangements, but these are not relevant to this call-in. The 2015 decision report specifically refers to the use of the Section 123 disposal powers and by extension the valuation process to be followed. The Cabinet at that time set the policy context for the Council, which was to generate resources to support the Council's revenue and capital planning. The Cabinet specifically described the intention to renovate existing properties for residential use. This decision was unanimously endorsed by the then Cabinet, and the essence of this policy has not been amended by the current administration and remains in place. A transfer agreement of staff to ADL and other procedural matters was agreed by our Cabinet on the 16th of January 2020, but there has been no substantial departure from the policy set by the Cabinet in 2015. It is therefore entirely disingenuous for Conservative members to attack this administration for following through on a policy they initiated, amended, and supported over their period in office. The clear intention expressed by the then Cabinet was to utilise the ADL company to generate income for the Council in preference to open market disposal where competition applied. The policy has the huge advantage, of course, that it retains profits in the form of dividends for the Council, instead of these being lost to the private sector, a point none of your speakers seem to have noticed. There's never been any point in employing a competitive process, as this would fundamentally undermine the commercial relationship between ADL and the Council. So, Chair, in conclusion, my decision follows long-established Council policy, originally agreed by the administration prior to ours and followed through by our administration as part of the continuing need to generate income for the council as set out in our medium-term financial strategy. Now, I want to deal with, as I wind up, move to the last points in the call-in. First, the assertion that the above are contrary to the interests of Baines taxpayers. Well, those who signed the call-in did not specify what they considered to be decisions in the best interests of taxpayers, so it is difficult to speculate as to what was in their thinking. However, it is clear from the law and government guidance that disposals at undervalues by local authorities are anticipated and are not unusual. And Circular 0603 makes that very clear. I want to just move now to call in reason 2. The case has not been made to justify the below market value disposal, and so the asset should be listed on the open market where it will fetch greater returns to the council. Well, firstly, the officer report, together with its annexes and supporting information, very clearly sets out the basis for the disposal of this property at less than market value. It is untrue that open market unrestricted sale produces a higher return for the council, and these figures are set out in the report. Chairman, my conclusion is that the grounds for this call-in are spurious and politically motivated, and seek to question the professional advice, both from officers and independent legal and commercial advisors, to me as a decision maker. My decision followed well-established policy and practice within the council, policy and practice that was set out by the previous council administration. The decision is also wholly lawful and follows the circular advice set out by the Ministry of Housing and Local Government on the use of Section 123 powers. I entirely reject the grounds set out in the call-in notice, and I call upon the panel to do the same. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Councillor Samuel? This is factual questions at this point. If I could call Councillor Sean Hughes.
Thank you. So I just have a very quick question regarding this valuation. It seems that the valuation hinges on these voluntary conditions and restrictive covenants that we're going to put in place. They seem to impact very heavily on the value of this property. So I'm just wondering, how watertight would these be? Because assuming that a landlord at some point in the future would take ownership of these, or one or more of these apartments, are we saying that these covenants would restrict them from renting them to students or to letting them as Airbnbs? And if it were to be, if we were to impose restrictions on students, that would then potentially impact on people in adult education, student nurses, families that have students within their families. So I was just wondering, how watertight will these restrictions be?
Well, they'll be completely watertight because they will be built into the covenants of sale. This administration does not want to see this accommodation provided to students and holiday lets. It wants to provide units that are useful to local people who are seeking this type of accommodation in this particular location. And I just want to go on, Councillor Hughes, to pick up this point about the valuation. I'm not a valuer. I know nothing about valuation, so I rely on people who are qualified and experienced to do so in providing advice to the council. I would have no idea how to value a property like this, which is why I listen to the professional advice provided to the council and endorsed by the officers, the statutory officers of the council, who also view all reports that members make before decisions are reached. So I think it's a very, very slippery path that we go down if we choose to take selectively the pieces of information that we like the sound of and ignore the pieces of information we do not. We do not operate like that as councillors. We listen to the advice and then we make a judgment according to the advice. But what we cannot do is to ignore it.
Okay, could I invite Councillor Dogood, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Samuel, it looks as if the call-in is premised on really the value of the restricted value and the non-restricted value. But that's only part of the economics, isn't it? I mean, there are other things. In the paper, it shows that the gross returns to the council are between 600,000 and 800,000. So in the call-in, we're not looking at apples and apples. There are two separate sets of figures. And presumably, having looked at the ADL business plan, and we can't reference any numbers in that, but clearly the policy set up under the previous administration and the corporate governance associated with it is that they pay a dividend. So the actual financial return to the council isn't just the narrow definition that the call-in is premised in. It's based on more than that, isn't it?
Yes, you're correct. There are figures in the round that have to be looked at in this. This is not purely a case of the headline dividend to the council. The papers also reference, for example, increases in council tax payments to us as council tax collection authority over, say, a 20-year life. If you have a single dwelling, the council tax for that, I imagine, for a property of that size would be in the higher council tax bands. But if you have 6 units, which would be rated according to the valuation agency decisions, you clearly are going to get more council tax. And the estimate that's been provided to me is that over a 20-year period, that would be £117,000 more than were that not to be the case. There is also provision within the transfer agreement to ADL that ADL is allowed to retain an element of the profit to feed into their own build-up of equity so that the company can function. And if you think about it, that makes sense, because there is no point in the council setting up a company and then bleeding it dry of equity, because all that will do is to fold the company. The company has to have working capital to work with, to fund its operations and to do more. And that was anticipated explicitly in the decisions taken by the previous administration. So you're right, there are more figures underneath this, and they do, as a result, take the total gains on this development in excess of the open market value of simple disposal. And of course, the last point I'd make on this is that this is a recycling of money into the council's finances. If we were solely to sell this property, any profit that was made out of future conversion by a private sector developer would be retained by that developer and not recycled back into use by this council to benefit residents.
Okay, you happy with that answer? Then Councillor Warrington.
My question's been asked. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question, not as chair, but as a member of the panel. I'm just keen to understand, and for everybody to understand, this sort of local government view on valuation. So I asked this question really to find out if the valuation were to be for an asset like this, where the cabinet member didn't feel it was the right amount, is it your understanding as a cabinet member that you have to accept that? You have to acknowledge it, as far as I understand, but obviously if you felt it was questionable, do you believe you have no right to question it? Is my first question. And if you like, we could divert to Michael Hewitt afterwards, if you feel happier for the legal sense of that.
Well, no, I will, Chair, I will answer that question, because Councillor Blackburn posed it as well. And it is a fact that when I received the valuation report and its outcome, I queried the figures on 2 occasions, because the undervalue is substantial, and I anticipated there would be downstream issues with making a decision based on those valuations. So I queried them, and I think that was the right thing to do. As a result of that query, more information was provided on top of the information in the first valuation report, but at the end of the day, the figures did not change. So there was more information on the way that the valuation had been derived. To take the second part of your question, well, I'll just read a short extract. There's one sentence from the Circular 0603, which sets out the basis that authorities are to deal with undervalues. However, when disposing of land at an undervalue, authorities must remain aware of the need to fulfill their fiduciary duty in a way that is accountable to local people. And that is exactly the reason why the government advice goes on to say, as part of section 123, that you must use a RICS accredited independent valuer with knowledge of the area. And that is exactly what the council did. Now, if you choose to ignore that advice, well, you can't ignore it. You have to go down that route. But if the advice, the valuation advice, comes back in a way that you don't like the figures, actually, your duty to the council as a councillor bound by the council codes means you cannot ignore that information when it's presented to you by somebody who is qualified to do so. Now, Michael Hewitt may be able to expand on that, or Andy Rothery, but we are bound within the rules that operate to make sure that the council runs a properly audited and sound financial decision-making process.
Okay, so just before we go on, although as you then now confirm, as Councillor Blackburn noted, you've noted, I should say, you were uneasy, shall we say, or questioned to start with the value. Can I ask, are you happy now with that valuation? In a sense of you weren't happy, can I ask the question fair and square, are you personally happy with that now?
Well, I don't think it's for me to be happy or unhappy. The valuation is what it is. It is a professional valuation provided to the council who paid for that advice and received it. I can be unhappy with it, but that's not the point. The point is that was the advice received, and that's what I had to follow. What I've said to you is that I queried the figures when I received them, and I wanted more explanation behind them, and I did receive that information, and that is now included within the valuation report, which I don't know if you've got that paper or not, quite a long document. So it's not a question about whether I'm happy with it. One can be unhappy with things, but you still have to follow the advice given.
Well, if I might then try to split the hair one other way, and that is, could I ask you whether you are querying it today or since, or are you no longer querying it? In the fact that you've admitted that you queried it rather than questioned it, are you not querying it now? You may choose not to answer, and I'm asking this not as the chair, but as a member of the panel. So are you not querying that now?
The valuation report from Knight Frank sets out in considerable detail the way that the valuation is constructed and how the figures ultimately that it produced at the end of its valuation were derived. Now, some of those areas would be beyond my level of competence to understand. I freely admit that. That's why I defer to officers within the council to confirm that the valuation advice we received was appropriate and correct for the circumstances. So that's my answer to that.
Okay. And my final question, sorry, I've just had two parts to it, is that you obviously cite, and I ask this as a member of the panel, not as chair, you cite that all these rules were done by a previous administration, but that was at least 5 years ago. So would you say that there would be any bearing on thinking that could change over 5 years? For example, given the very straitened financial circumstances and the state of the market for property in general. So is it reasonable to assume that however much a previous administration had policies, that it's rigidly to be stuck to and quoted today when the conditions are so very different 5 years on?
Well, strangely, Chairman, there are circumstances in which things that one administration does can be seen to be equally as good an idea by a subsequent administration. The principle behind the creation of ADL as a local authority controlled company was to retain the profits from development within the council's own finances rather than handing these out to the private sector. Now, that fundamental principle on which the Cabinet made its decision 5 years ago has not changed. And the fact that we're still developing sites with ADL, retaining dividends, which feed incidentally into the council's revenue account, and with a development such as Riverside in Keynsham, which the administration of which you were part of, did very successfully indeed and led to considerable dividends for the council. That principle is not opposed or questioned by the administration that I'm part of. The principle was sound. So I think that, one sometimes has to accept, yes, things change between administrations, but as I said in my speech earlier on, we have not fundamentally changed anything to do with the policy that the administration you were part of agreed 5 years ago. What we have done is to clarify some of the working arrangements between the two organisations, and no doubt that will continue to improve. But we have been committed to make this work in exactly the same way as councillors in the Cabinet previously wished to do. So, I think there's nothing that divides us in terms of that. And I think, had we been considering this property in a different time, I think you would have been drawn to the same conclusions and would have encountered the same issues.
Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Samuel. Just picking up on something that Eleanor raised about there being 3 separate valuations. That is something that sometimes happens. I know for some decisions. Can you just clarify why that isn't required in this case? I assume it isn't required as it hasn't happened, but I realise the evaluation report is very extensive. But can you just clarify that point?
I'm sorry to say that I couldn't really follow the point Councillor Jackson was making. I'm not being rude there. I couldn't follow the point. We were only required to get one valuation from a professionally qualified organisation, and that's what we did. So sure. I'm not quite sure where the other valuations issue comes in. I mean, it would be for ADL, if they wish to do so, to commission their own advice to satisfy their own company governance, but that has nothing to do with the council. The council's duty relates to undervalue below best consideration, and that's the point that the valuers were asked to address.
Sure, and you're only required to get one valuation for that.
That is my understanding, yes.
Yep. Okay, Councillor Dogood.
Councillor Samuel, in the reason 1 for the call, and it says it's contrary to the interests of council taxpayers and BAMES. This questioning so far is just concentrated on economics. But what about the social and environmental criteria? Did you look at that in coming to your decision? Because Bath is notorious in the country as being one of the worst affordable ratios in terms of income. And the market in Bath doesn't really work in favour of most residents in BAMES. I don't know many younger residents of Bath who've grown up here who can afford to live in Bath. So how much criteria, how much credibility did you look at in terms of social? And also one of the reasons for the residual value difference is the improved sustainability and energy efficiency, where no doubt we're going to be retrofitting. Were they just as important in your thinking as the economic criteria?
Well, yeah, yes, they were, because the part of the decision that I have to acknowledge that I agreed is that there should be, first of all, that the sale prices of the apartments themselves should not be ridiculously high and beyond the reach of local people. So that in turn would relate to the standards which, the standards of interior fitting that would be done to, to create the value of any particular property. The second is the nature of the development in terms of the sort of things that we as a council wanted to see incorporated in it. So I talked about energy efficiency and holding a recognition of the climate and nature emergency, and the restriction on the unfettered use for students and hold-lets. And it is a fact that many developers, I'm afraid, in our city have chosen to pursue developments to those groups because they are highly profitable. Whether they are socially desirable is an entirely another question, and probably beyond the scope of this meeting today. But the impact of placing those restrictions on the sale of the property or on the disposal of the property does have an impact on the value. And I think what members here today are perhaps struggling with is how much that restriction on open market disposal brings. So I think that it's not an easy question to answer in this sort of format, but I mean, I did look at those facts. Otherwise, we would be disposing of this without any of those conditions, and we would have very little control over what is produced. And what I'd suggest is that Bath does not need any more very high-end property for its residents. That doesn't benefit the vast majority of residents who live in the city and beyond. So trying to produce some lower cost housing is of advantage socially.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Just another question very quickly. So, I mean, we've got no reason to doubt the valuation from Knight Frank. And obviously they've based their valuation on the brief that they've been given. So I'm wondering, first of all, I'm wondering who produced the brief? Was that our own property services, or did ADL have some inputs into the brief? And do you think it might be useful for the panel if we were actually to see the brief? Do you think that would help to clarify the situation?
Oh, well, it certainly wouldn't have been ADL. That would have been completely inappropriate. The council, as the decision-making body, needs to commission its own advice. That will have been commissioned by officers. I can't tell you here and now exactly which officer commissioned that advice, but it would have been somebody within John Wilkinson's directorate, because John Wilkinson was the director at the time. So it would have been commissioned in the way that the council normally seeks these kind of professional valuations, and it's not something I'm able to comment on. But there are officers here who can probably answer that question.
Okay, is that answered for you, Sean? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Could I just ask a question as me, not as chair, just to clarify something that came up? That I forget which speaker it was, but someone said whether the restrictions were on or not, it wouldn't justify the lower value to the extent it did, because there was planning permission, and on the open market, the view was that there could be a higher price and yet still get your social restrictions. Would you refute that? If I make that statement as a concept, would you refute that, Richard? Would you refute that by simply letting it go, it is the only way to get those social things by doing it with ADL?
Well, first of all, two of the public speakers claimed, without actually any evidence to support this, that they had evidence that there were better offers out there somewhere. What I think both of those speakers missed was that actually we are a public body with legal and financial responsibilities for the way that we do business. And actually getting an offer on the back of a fag packet from somebody who says, I can do a better job, is not really the way we operate. So I discount that. I discount what those two speakers said. Now I forgot the point of your question, Chairman, because I was getting so excited.
No, the point was that we've just rehearsed through these social benefits much lauded, apart from retaining profit or otherwise internally. So on what I was saying, could you really confirm to me that you think the only way to get it is to do that internally or through a council-owned company, as opposed to what the speakers seem to be implying, if I've got it right, that being on the open market, we could have our cake and eat it, a higher value. And now I know your professional advice is not the higher value, but could we get the social things on the open market, do you think?
No, I don't think we can, because once the council has disposed of a freehold or a long leasehold, if there are no conditions attached to that sale, the purchaser can do basically what they want within the constraints of the planning system. And we know that the planning system cannot impose the levels of control that we were proposing on the disposal of this property. Otherwise, we would use that process, wouldn't we? And I come back to what I've said several times, is that people seem to have lost sight of the purpose of having an arm's length property company. It is to recycle the development profit that can exist in buildings and land back into the council, rather than that profit being lost to the private sector. And I'm sure we can all point to examples where the council has sold assets and the people who have bought them have done things that we perhaps haven't entirely liked, but it's too late by that point. This way, the council retains control over the development and its future output in a way that meets the council's corporate objectives. And I of course, can accept that any administration from time to time will change those corporate objectives. That's part of democracy. But for the moment, the things that we have put into this, this particular disposal are things that we feel are important. So we're following that pathway. So does that answer your question, Chair?
Almost. I think I've heard enough on that to understand, I think, where you stand. So I don't intend to specifically comment on the position of ADL or anything, as comments were made, but in terms of risk, do you believe that there is greater risk of following the internal company disposal policy and this, I think the comment was made, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush? Obviously, I think it's fair to say, is it, that you're convinced that there's more benefit socially and financially for the route you're proposing? Do you acknowledge that, as some of the speakers have, that there's more risk associated, particularly in a COVID environment and with a potential recession and property issues, property market? So do you acknowledge at all that there's more risk with this route?
Well, I don't acknowledge there's more risk. There is always risk with any development, and the information provided by officers does give a range of potential profit and dividend return. And I think that acknowledges the fact that when you are doing any development in the market, there is always a risk that things will go wrong. I think, looking at the figures, there is quite a margin on this particular development. So I feel reasonably confident that what has been set out in the various reports does mitigate the risk. And it's not as if ADL as a development partner is untried in the council's terms. I mean, we will all know as councillors that they have undertaken a number of developments, some of which have been highly successful and have produced return. So there's obviously not something fundamentally wrong with the model. when we ask ADL to produce a business case, of course, one of the things we do is that we try to form a view as to whether what they are proposing in terms of the costs of development, the product at the end of the day, is de-risked in the way that we make the decision. So we do that before the decision is made. And I'm not saying it is in this instance, if the figure work that came to us indicated that either the margins were very small or the risk was very high, we probably wouldn't proceed with that particular development. But I'm not aware that has happened so far in any of the schemes where we have worked with ADL.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I don't believe I've got any further speakers. So if anybody is waiting in the chat thing, could you just make yourselves known? We've got quite a long list of people I believe we've been through. So that's no more questions. Okay, so on that basis, therefore, we will now ask for a closing statement from Councillor Samuel, and that will be followed by a closing statement from Councillor Pritchard. We have allowed 5 minutes for this, but as I say, with pressure of time, without rushing you, if you feel free to speak for less if you wish. So, Councillor Samuel, could I ask you please to sum up now, please?
Yes, Chairman, I will be very, very brief. One could believe in reading this call-in that our administration had invented an entirely new process for developing property and recycling the benefit into the council's finances. As I pointed out on a number of occasions in our discussion, this was a well-established policy with a well-established pipeline that had been agreed by the previous administration and has not been altered one iota by our administration, and that we have worked just as hard as I'm sure you did in power to achieve a pipeline of schemes that created a viable local authority controlled property company. And that's the key point I would make. All of this has been done to ultimately produce benefit for taxpayers through the recycling of money that would otherwise escape into the private sector. So we have followed that process. We have not changed it. And yes, we've challenged it at times where we were not sure that the particular development schemes should proceed, but we have fundamentally followed the policy and not altered it. So I really do not see the point of this call-in. I think it is achieving very little, but I encourage you to discount it, because I don't think anything that has been undertaken on this disposal of 117 Newbridge Hill departs from that existing policy and practice, and it is compliant with legal and financial considerations. That's it, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Could I ask then Councillor Pritchard, please, to sum up?
Yes, thank you. I'll be equally brief, because Councillor Samuels has put a very good defence of policy process. But let's look at this in a lay perspective and how the public in general perceive this. They see the council disposing of a property that's grossly undervalued to what it would on the open market. They won't have an understanding of the intricacies and the commitments made to support the company within the confines of the council itself. And this is why this has been brought out, this call-in. It's in essence that the fundamental element of this is whether it's perceived as being true value that's been gained by the council. Now, Councillor Samuels has made, as I say, a very eloquent defence of the position, but there's still that undercurrent that you could go back and look at the valuations again. And unfortunately, Councillor Samuels didn't realise or understand what Councillor Jackson was saying. There's a process that certainly town and parish councils have to adhere to, where they seek 3 valuations of any project they need to embark on. So she's having an understanding that that would be adopted in this process, but now Councillor Samuel's saying 1 valuation is sufficient. It may be a very professional and it may be a reputable company, but surely it would be more prudent to seek 3 valuations and then go for which is the best, and also working in the public benefits of what can be gained through conditions associated with that. So these are the 2 considerations. You just coldly accept what Councillor Samuel says. He's coldly adhering to the policies that have been set down in when ADL were formed. So he says there's nothing untoward. We're not suggesting there is anything untoward, but could the process be improved? He did say that these things gradually over the course of time can be reevaluated. Is this the opportunity to do it now? Do you go and seek further valuation and see if it can't enhance that valuation to the benefit of the council and all of the council taxpayers' money that we're as I say, we're managing, and that we have that responsibility. So I'll leave it there now, Chairman.
Okay then, well, thank you very much. So if I can then very clearly say to both the person calling it in, Councillor Pritchard, and the Cabinet member, at this stage then, I'll just check that you've concluded and we're going to move on to the debate. And unless there's sort of an exceptional circumstance where the panel really can't carry on without clarifying something with you, then otherwise the debate is with the members of the panel to come to a conclusion. So can you just nod that we're happy, we're moving on now, Councillor Samuel and Councillor Pritchard, yeah? Okay, and thank you for your contributions and for the other speakers. And now the panel is in a position to debate this. Now we have been going an hour and a half, but we do this normally without a break. So unless I receive requests to have a break, I propose we carry on whilst all this debate, question answers is fresh in our mind, if I may. So on that basis, I'll now type debate in our chat and ask if anybody would like to speak. Does nobody want to be first? Oh, splendid. They're coming in. So, Councillor Hughes, if you'd like to start for us, please.
Yeah, I've got a few concerns. I think it seems that firstly, I think that the basis for the reduction in the valuation on this, the key to it seems to be whether this should be a single home or apartments. And they've about 50% of the reduction is based on the fact that it can't be a single home. But it doesn't seem to, I mean, I thought the trend these days was to take large homes and split them up into apartments to make more money. So I'm just a bit confused about such a huge reduction based on the fact that it's going to be 6 apartments rather than a home, a single home. Secondly, I do have concerns about this covenants that we're going to put in place. The idea that we'll put in a covenant that restricts it so in the future it can't become a accommodation for a student or an Airbnb. Once the apartments are built and sold into the open market, can we really, I mean, this is a question, I don't know the answer. Can we actually really put in a covenant that will stop any future landlords letting an apartment to a student? And as I said earlier, you know, there are some students, the student nurses or people in adult education, that perhaps we would want to be able to rent these apartments. So that's my first thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, and so our next speaker is Councillor Dogood.
Well, several points come to my mind. I mean, why, if some of the people speaking think there should be 3 valuations, why wasn't it set up like that in the first place? I think what Councillor Samuels tried to do, this doesn't seem to be a party political issue, and I know we're not certainly party political in this scrutiny, but he's followed through on the decisions made by the previous administration and the philosophy and the setup. I mean, I think the question of the finance is actually people not understanding the through profitability to the council. And when quizzed, Councillor Samuel said it will actually be greater than the £800,000 when you look at the through profitability of a 100% owned subsidiary. So I think that should be taken into account. I know we've had the benefit of looking at the business plan, and some of the speakers haven't, or haven't been refreshed perhaps since 2015. And, you know, the running and how he's looked at it is one thing, and the stewardship of the ADL presumably is in safe hands with Councillor Gerrish and Councillor Q amongst some of the non-executive directors. I think also we need to look at the track record of ADL since it was set up, and it's successfully targeted already city workers and young professionals in Terrace Walk, where it converted 8 units, and in Westgate buildings. So I think they know what they're doing. And also, I don't like this calling into question Knight Frank. You know, I'm no interest in Knight Frank, but they are one of the best in the city, in the Premier League. And I don't believe that they would have made a judgment that would be so far out. And certainly the valuation that Councillor Blackburn came up with. And I think the last point is the one where I quizzed that I'd like to make is that, you know, the contrary to the interests of the council taxpayers, it's not all about straight economics, even if we got the economics right. It's about social and environmental issues and the triple bottom line. And that's the responsibility of the council, the cabinet member in making this decision. And so I think, you know, the reasons that this has been called in, I'm not sure about that, contrary to the interests of the council, when you take a holistic perspective. And whether it would fetch greater returns for the council seems to be flawed on the basis of what the true through profitability is to the council. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, nobody seems to have come up with anything that justifies the call in on its own terms, as far as I can see. Councillor Samuel has made it clear that he's followed all of the guidance he was given. That guidance was given professionally. It wasn't, I don't think anybody's saying that the valuation was in some way fiddled or you know, they're at Knight Frank are a perfectly professional company. They've come up with a 60-page report that says that that's what they believe their valuation is. I don't think that Councillor Samuel has any grounds to ignore the valuation. I don't think that it has any kind of I don't think he has any basis to do that. And then, as Councillor Duguid has said, the whether it's to the benefit of council taxpayers ultimately, I'm afraid in order to make that assessment, we'd have to see an awful lot more information than we actually have in front of us, to be honest. We'd have to see the whole of the cash flow over a period of time. But I have no reason to believe that a bad assessment has been made there, that the profits that ADL make come back into the council. So I just, yeah, I don't understand the call in on its own terms, I'm afraid.
Okay, Councillor Warrington.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I do have concerns about this, just because I want to go back to the previous administration and the fact that this property was a potential transfer and it was possible. That doesn't mean to say that it was earmarked to be transferred, and nor does it insinuate that it was going to be transferred at that lower rate. So that's the first point. The second point is, I don't believe that the policy using ADL was anything to do or specified anything about how many valuations one had to have. I think that Councillor Jackson's point is that, you know, in local government at a lower level for parish and for town councils and for transparency, they get three valuations. And I don't know if anybody's had their house valued. I mean, I've had a, you know, 40, 50, 60 grand difference in valuations. Two professional estate agents in exactly the same area that specialised in property in that rural area. So I don't think that would necessarily be unreasonable. I suppose that I want to look at the risk, and I did a little Googling and I watched the property market. So I kind of want to look at the fact that it's laudable that we look at having flats. I have no issue with that. I do think that there certainly is an opportunity for that approach as opposed to larger houses, because that's what a lot of developers do. And I'd like to actually look at the environmental aspect as well. I think that people are becoming more and more engaged with the environment, and I think people are becoming more and more engaged with the fact that, you know, they don't want a drafty old Victorian apartment in an old house. And I think that a lot of people will be looking for those environmental, you know, those high standards when they purchase a property. So I'm not entirely sure at the moment that would necessarily be a major issue. I think people look for that. They don't, you know, they're looking at reducing their bills, especially if they want affordable housing. You know, they're looking at that, and people are far more engaged with climate and the impact that they have. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people looked at that as part of their buying process. So I'm not sure that is an issue. I think that there was a point that was made that, you know, if there was something different that was brought to the table, i.e., you know, there was social affordable housing, you know, for me, that would be great, because we know that we are missing that. And I suppose my question is about balance, really. Is it, in this huge financial turmoil that we're in, is it better to sell it at market value now, keep the money, rather than take a risk? And there are a number of aspects to that risk, and potentially put in a lot of effort. You know, we need that money now because of COVID. And will we have got through it, etc., in a couple of years' time, potentially, when this development will bring us back that dividend? We don't know. So the first risk is we don't know that ADL, ACL will get that planning. We don't know whether they actually will sell and make up that dividend. And we know that at least in 2021, there is a possibility, indeed even a probability, that the housing market will actually go down considerably. So I think those are factors that I am extremely concerned about, Chair. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Just before I bring the next speakers in, the next speakers have already spoken. If I can encourage people who haven't spoken to feel free to join in the debate, but we'll carry on with Councillor Elliott again.
Yeah, the three valuations thing, just because I raised it from the speaker's point. I mean, it seems to me that I mean, the answer Councillor Samuel gave was a perfectly sound one, which is that he isn't required to do so. And this isn't like a house valuation. It's a 60-odd page report. You can't presume. I mean, you could go and commission 3 60-odd page reports, but that's it. Presumably we're paying quite considerably for that report to be produced. And it doesn't seem likely to me that you're going to get wildly different results. They're a perfectly professional valuer. So it doesn't seem sensible to me that that you apply the same rules that you apply to you know, getting a free valuation from an estate agent on your house, when this isn't the same circumstance as that. It really is a very different thing. I think from the risk point of view, where the risk is actually not that great. We're selling this to our own property company. If the market values do go down, then that property company, the beauty of selling it to ADL, ACL, is that they can hold on to it and rent it if they want to, as a company. I mean, we don't have to sell it. They don't have to sell it. If the best thing to do at the time, once the development's complete, is to hold on to it and rent it, they can do that as well. And then we retain even more control over the property. The planning point, I think they've already got planning permission, as far as I understand it. The report says they've got planning. There is planning in place to convert it into 6 flats. So I don't think there's a particular risk there. It just seems to me that the just think everything that should be considered has been considered, and that the valuation report is sound and solid, and that Councillor Samuel is acting on sound and solid advice given by a professional organisation, and has no reason to reject it. It just doesn't seem. I don't see any grounds.
Okay, we've now got Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I absolutely agree. The fact we you know, we can't question the and I wouldn't question Knight Frank's valuation. But of course, I mean, the big part of the equation that's missing is the brief that they were given, that the valuation was based upon. And I just don't see how we can scrutinise or review this decision without that information. That's a key part of the decision-making process, and that's how Knight Frank came to their conclusion. I mean, there are some parts of that brief that were very good. I mean, obviously, within that brief, there was an element to do with making the building sustainable and energy efficient. But to say, without seeing that brief, I really don't see how we can scrutinise this.
Okay, Councillor McPhee.
Yes, I've listened with interest, and I perfectly agree with the comments of Councillor Elliott, actually, is that it's probably going to be very expensive to get another valuation. And suppose it was 60 grand different, or 100 grand different, or £200,000 different. If at the end of the day, we look at the amount of money we get from the house, given that we're going to get the profits that are going to be made from the development, I mean, I just can't see that that it would make much difference. We'd have 200 grand more in the sale and 200 grand less in the profits. So from my perspective, I feel quite happy. We're following agreed procedures. These procedures have been set down for a long time, and I think we can make a good case that we've been very conscientious, and so therefore I don't really find anything to argue with, and would let the decision go through.
Okay, Councillor Warrington.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not calling into question. I just want to clarify a couple of points. I'm not calling into question at all Knight Frank's valuation, and I'm merely giving the example of a residential evaluation as an example of how professional people can differ in their opinions. I just wanted to clarify that point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'd like to speak not as chair, but as a member of the panel, and I emphasise that. I think I was worried before today when I read about this, and I'm even more worried now. And the words that come to mind are the immortal words of Sir Humphrey Appleby, when he used to say to the minister, "That's very courageous, minister." And you think, my word, there's just that doubt. I wonder why they're saying that. And when people accuse me of being political, I always think, good Lord, have we run out of all the arguments now? We've got to drag that one out, have we? So we can't just have a logical debate. We've got to snipe about politics. And I don't emphasize that point. It's part of life. But the point is, when I ask the question, so do you think it's okay? Because when it boils down to it, I believe the public of Bath and North East Somerset will look at us and look at the Cabinet and they'll say, you know, whatever the rules are, and the rules are there, are these people using common sense? Are they actually representing us? Are they behaving like, yes, all the rules are there to ensure financial probity, and one quote's in the rules, and the rules are the rules? But what about the common sense? What if something then were to go wrong and, you know, things don't work out? That's why I think this is very courageous, because it's very courageous to quote rules in a discussion in the cabinet room 5 or 6 years ago and say, I'm covered. I'm covered by the local government rules, even though I had, what was it? It wasn't doubts, though, was it? And so the point is, why is it that we're dragging out politics, one valuation? You know, we've got to have the social consideration. And here we are, we've got an unprecedented budget crisis. We've got COVID. We didn't know about that in 2015. And just think what this money foregone, the bird in the hand, could be worth right now to a council that's desperately fighting back, cutting back services, talking about having to charge people this and that to go to recycling centres for certain items. Oh no, no, no! But the decision was made and the policy was done in 2015. Well, I think the public expect us to look at it today and use our common sense as much as to hide behind a decision made 6 years ago. And this just, to me, screams one thing, that the actual imperative, however genuine and however much within the rules it is, I think two speakers have mentioned that the property company needs business. And, you know, I just float the idea that
I think you ought to
what does
propose.
this look like?
We need you to propose a motion.
So what I would say is, I think we need to be very careful about this and consider the position we're in today. So, Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, as for bringing politics into it, it's a call in raised by the Conservative group. It is a, I mean, there are politics involved, so I think that's kind of plain, really. I don't blame Councillor Samuel for pointing out the politics of the situation, and I keep coming back to that. You talk about common sense. Frankly, you can apply all the common sense in the world, but my common sense might be different to your common sense, might be different to Councillor Warrington's common sense, might be different to. There was professional advice given, and if Councillor Samuel is going to go against that professional advice, he's got to have a very good reason beyond I don't think it's right. That you can't just apply common sense. You've got to listen to the professional advice. As he acknowledged himself, he doesn't know how to value a property like this. That's why he asks for professional advice. So I think that's disingenuous. I don't think you can just use common sense. You've got to ask professionals what they think. Finally, the bird in the hand argument. We're not talking about bird in the hand worth two in the bush. We're talking about passing the bird from one hand to the other. We own this company. It's ours. It's our company. So we're not losing it. I just don't think that's accurate either. I think that the bird in the hand argument would apply, sure, if we were talking about selling it off on the private market, then you are actually talking about that. You're talking about kind of, oh, quick, let's realize the cash. But actually, this is a considered long-term judgment. I think it makes perfect sense. I think that you know, if we have other problems with ADL, they're not for discussion in this call-in. This call-in is about how is that property valued? Are we happy that Councillor Samuel has correctly taken advice on on the value of the property. And I don't see any other decision than yes, of course he has.
So, Councillor Singleton.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened carefully to the debate, and we've heard a lot of opinions and a certain number of facts. And ordering some of those facts, it seems to me that it is a relatively straightforward. As I hear it, proper process has been followed, and that not to follow the professional advice that has been taken would put Councillor Samuel at risk of behaving ultra vires. We've heard that in economic terms, that the proposal will give in the longer term a greater financial benefit to the council taxpayers of Baines than to sell it on the open market now. And we've heard again that social and environmental benefits built in add to the overall value as opposed to purely the financial value of the deal. On the basis of that, I don't see how the call-in stands up. Thank you.
Councillor McPhee. Your microphone switched off, Councillor McPhee.
Beg your pardon. So I would like to propose that the committee determines the decision should proceed as agreed by the Cabinet and dismiss the call-in.
Okay, now we've got this proposal in. Has everybody made the points that they wanted to? Just to check that everybody's spoken. Does anybody have any points to make? If not, no. Okay then. So,
sorry.
Is there a seconder to that proposal? That's Mark, yes? Yeah. So, Councillor McPhee's proposed, Councillor Elliott seconded. So we'll now go to a vote on that. And Councillor Warrington, you put up your hand.
Yeah, are we allowed a named vote on that, Chair?
I don't know, to be honest. I've never had one before. So could the Democratic Services, well, no, not in a panel, I mean, that I'm aware of, sorry. We've had them in council. Officer Morrison, would you please advise me?
It's not within your rules as it is within council rules, but I can't see there's anything wrong with that if that's the will of the panel. You can go ahead.
Do we need to take a vote on it?
No, because it's not a procedural rule that you're proceeding with or you know.
Do we need a resolution?
So,
do we need a resolution to do it?
You as chair are conducting the meeting, and if you think it's a reasonable thing to do, you can do it. There's no rule that supports you either way, so it's fine.
Well, look, I throw this open to the extent that it's a request that's been made by a panel member. Unless it is viewed controversially, anybody violently objects, then it would seem a reasonable enough request if that's allowed. Anybody could actually look at the screen because it's not a secret ballot. So I ask now, is anybody violently opposed to me allowing this and feeling it in any way undermines democracy? I'm not getting any response. So in all fairness, I'm taking that's okay. So speak now. Okay. So on that basis, what I'll do is the proposer and seconder, if it's all right with you, I'll go back to my notes at the start of the meeting and I'll read out the members of the panel's names for them to actually then confirm how they vote. Okay. So, but I can't find that piece of paper because I didn't think I was going to use it again. Oh, here it is. Excellent. So I'll now read out the names, and if it's all right, Joe, I'll ask them to say for, against, or abstain. Is that acceptable on this vote? Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. And just to confirm that the proposal is that the call-in is dismissed. So it's whether people are for or against or abstaining on that. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Dogood?
For.
Councillor Elliott?
For.
Councillor Furs?
For.
Councillor Hodge?
Abstain.
Councillor Hughes.
Sorry, I still have concerns, so against.
Right. Councillor McPhee.
For.
Councillor Singleton.
For.
Councillor Warrington.
Against.
And myself, I get a vote, so against. So, Joe, if you could confirm what the outcome is, please.
Yes, that is 3 against, 1 abstention, and 5 for. So that is carried.
So, I confirm, therefore, that the decision as voted for, and that on that basis, the meeting is therefore closed. Is that correct, Joe, that we've done all the business we need to?
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to thank all the councillors today who've been involved in the panel, the speakers, the member of public on Zoom, and our officers who have supported us. I think it's been good scrutiny, a thorough debate, and I'm very pleased to see that we brought this in on 2 hours without in any way restricting the debate. And as I say, we've done our job as a panel, so I'd like to thank everybody today. So have a good